members and members of staff. So I just call open the City of Unley Council Assessment meeting of tonight, the 19th of May 2000 and what year are we in? 2020? Year 2020? Before commencing the meeting, however, I'd just like to acknowledge that this land that we meet on today is the traditional land of the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. I'd just like to acknowledge to any other language groups that might be present at this meeting, given that we are meeting virtually. Welcome panel members, members of the public, members of staff as well. Thank you for supporting us through this meeting. For the information of the gallery and those members of the community who are present in the gallery, my name's Shanti Ditta. I'm the presiding member of the panel and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. The other members of the City of Unley Council Assessment Panel are Jenny Boisvert, Roger Freeman, Sandy Wilkinson, and I'm not sure whether Sandy has joined us yet. Sandy, if you're there, shout out, and Mr. Brenton Berman. So thank you, panel members, for making yourselves available for this meeting tonight. Officers that we have present are our assessment manager, Mr. Gary Brinkworth, team leader planner, Mr. Andrew Raven, supported by acting senior planner, Mrs. Amy Barrett, and all of us capably supported. Thank you, Lily Francis, for taking minutes for us and keeping us on the ball and keeping us running with this meeting. So we'll now move to the confirmation. Actually, no, we'll do our conflicts of interest first. Now, Roger has declared a conflict of interest for 6 to 10 Greer Street due to being a friend of the representatives. Are there any other items that members wish to declare any conflicts of interest?
No.
No.
Nope. Okay, well, we'll move then to the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting from the 21st of April. Members, have you had a chance to have a look at those minutes?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm happy to move.
Thank you, Jenny.
Happy to second.
Thank you,
That's
Brenton. Yep. Any discussion on the minutes, members?
No.
No.
Okay.
Closed.
We will move straight into that. I'll put that motion for the minutes. All those in favour, raise your hands.
Yes. Yep. Go.
All those against? That's carried. Thank you. Now we have items 1 and 2, and whilst the applications are of different matters, they are of the same site. And I'm capably informed by Andy that we have the same representative and the same applicant for both items. Members, would you be happy if we suggested to the representative and the applicant that they address both items for their presentations, and we might give both a little bit of extra time?
Fine by
I'm
me.
happy with that.
Quite happy with that.
Okay, well, let's do that then. So we have Nikki Pearce, who has confirmed wanting to speak to both item 1 and item 2. Nikki, Gary's just indicating to you if you could come forward to the chair with the computer and introduce yourselves to us. I'm not sure if you're there on your own or whether you've got anyone else with you. If you have, welcome. And you've got, normally we would give you 5 minutes to speak, but we might give you a little bit of extra given that this is over 2 items. Before you sort of dive out of the meeting though, we may have questions seeking clarification from you. So if you could just, once you finish presenting, don't leave immediately. We'll get you to answer any questions that we may have. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Yes. Yep.
So I'm Nikki Pearce. I'm the joint owner with my husband of Unit 1, 14 Catherine Street. Whilst I'm opposed to this whole development, in the spirit of compromise in our objection, we requested that the carport wall on dwelling 2 be moved off our boundary at the ground level. But we believe this is an entirely reasonable request because the rest of the development is set back by 900 mil on the eastern boundary, and moving it will not impact the ingress or egress of traffic movements. This is supported by the fact that the driveway width is between dwellings 5 and 6 is 4,200 mils, and as between dwellings 3 and 4, 6,567 mils. This is on page 35 of the council papers. Why does this driveway need to be so wide at the front when there is ample space to move the carport off the boundary wall by 900 mil? It doesn't merit consent in this current form. I've also sought independent advice from an appropriately qualified professional who has reviewed the plans and agrees that there is ample room to move dwelling 2 over by 900 mil without impacting the development. The development, does not merit consent in this current form. On page 9, the applicant's response admits that dwelling 2 does not meet setback requirements in Principle 13 in respect to the boundary wall. It's utterly unreasonable for this boundary wall to be allowed in this plan location in the current face. The assessment on page 17 that the variances within the development plan would not adversely impact upon adjoining land is just wrong. It deeply impacts us on the eastern side with the garage built on the boundary. This impacts our indoor and outdoor private open space and enjoyment. Setback under PDC 13 on page 18 clearly stipulates the buildings taller than 7 metres must be set back 3 metres from the side boundary. This proposal comes nowhere near meeting this requirement. PDC 16 refers to providing suitable setbacks, private open space, natural lights, permeable surfaces, etc. So why should this new development get more protections than what I'm supposed to have in my adjoining property? It does not merit consent. No mention has been made about removal of our fence on the boundary. Will this occur? We don't know. They haven't sought to consult with us. We object to now having the view of a rendered brickwork from our western windows and our outdoor living space. PDC 41 makes it clear that development should allow direct winter sunlight into adjacent properties like mine. The modelling is just rubbish. It will be a fact that my home will become dark and dingy, possibly slimy, as a direct consequence of this development. It does not merit consent unless the wall is moved back 900 mils to maximise light. We're going from having open space to a 3.125 metre brick wall to stare at. I find it utterly reprehensible and objectionable that the assessing officer considers that this excessive wall height will not affect the enjoyment of my property. On page 8 of the applicant's response, that the adjoining units have shade cloth or more dense covering, implying that we don't have get any winter sun anyway, is just false. My unit, and as has other units, we have solid structures that are laser light for the very reason to let the winter sun in while still enjoying the outdoor living space. To be deprived of this winter sun from 3 p.m. also deprives the current lifestyle enjoyed by the occupants. This will also have an economic impact. Increased heating costs will be another factor to be endured. You will also have decreased ventilation and a claustrophobic feel in our outdoor living space. Almost every aspect of this proposal exceeds the requirements stipulated in the development plan as does not adequately comply with the development plan. It is pushing the boundaries in nearly every respect, wholly inadequate setbacks at ground and upper levels, private open space, none of it complies. As a ratepayer who bought our property in good faith, I'm entitled to rely on the CAP to uphold requirements of this development plan. It does not merit consent. Surely a builder as reputable as Scott Salisbury could propose a development more sensitive and in compliance with the development plan. In this format does not meet merit consent, and I'm hoping that the CAP will make Scott Salisbury homes be better citizens.
Thank you, Ms. Pearce. Members, do you have any questions?
Sorry.
Oh, don't run away.
Sorry. I'm still here.
Roger, Brenton.
I suppose just that the question about the boundary. I mean, the development plan talks about 3 metres, and this on the boundary is 3.125. And so, what's the height of the current fence at the moment on that boundary?
Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't measured that, but I can see over it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Brenton, I think you had your hand up, And then Jenny?
No questions from me.
Jenny?
Yes, my question was simply about the land use next to that garage wall. What's happening there on your property?
That's our outdoor living space. That's our back door. That's where the little coffee table is sometimes set up.
Oh, that's your back.
Yeah.
Okay.
A brick wall straight in our face as soon as we walk out our back door into our outdoor living space. We'll be claustrophobic. There'll be less ventilation. It will be just horrible.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members?
Nope.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Pearce. I'll let you take your seat and we might invite the applicant. Do we have David Hutchison in the gallery? Thank you, David. You two, we'll give you a bit of extra time to address the issues that's been brought up by the representative and any other matters that you think we need to be familiar or aware of that perhaps hasn't been addressed in either the report or the material that's been presented to us.
Thanks, Madam Presiding Member and panel members. Look, you've got my written response to the representations that deals with all of the issues that have been raised in the verbal submissions tonight. The subject land sits between 4 and probably about 1.2 metres lower than the adjoining unit development. So the wall on the boundary is not going to be the full 3 metre high wall relative to the height of the adjoining unit development. It replaces a 1.8 metre high fence that's on top of a low retaining wall that runs along the section of the adjoining residential property. And as you can see from the aerial photographs, which you have on your screen at the moment, there's quite a substantial tree that sits in the corner of the property that already provides shadow to the open space of the unit in question. And you can see the laser light roof on the property next door, which seems to be relatively opaque in any event. The garage wall isn't going to create any significant overshadowing across the property, especially compared to the trees that are there at the present time. As I said in my response to the representations, the open space is going to be relatively free of shadow until probably late in the afternoon in winter time. So in terms of overshadowing, it certainly meets the test of not being unreasonable in terms of the effect on the private open space of the adjoining unit development. Look, it's not unusual to have carports on boundaries. The development plan envisages carports on boundaries in most instances. It's not overly high. It's a standard 3 metre high wall on the boundary. It's rendered. Scott Salisbury, I'm sure, would be more than happy to render it in the colour that's the adjoining neighbour. And in relation to the removal of the fence, obviously, if this development's approved, there will need to be a Fences Act application and negotiation with the owner in relation to the removal of the fence and the construction of the wall on the boundary in any event. The application's been thoroughly assessed by the council planning staff. It's been recommended for approval. The variations from the development plan have been acknowledged throughout the report to be minor. The development does meet the ground floor setback for the dwelling component and the upper floor component of the development in total. And so in that respect, the impacts associated with the development are really no different than you would have if, for example, the property was developed with a single detached dwelling at the front of the house like most of the other properties in the street. I'm not sure I've got very much more to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchison. Members, do you have any questions of the applicant? Jenny?
Yes, I've just got a couple of questions. Number one, are the trees in the neighbour's backyard deciduous?
No idea.
Because that would, if they aren't deciduous, then it sort of, the argument falls into I guess into the realms of, yes, it would be overshadowing. If it's already overshadowed with leaves all winter, then that's a different story. We'll ask the lady to come back and answer that question in a minute.
Well, perhaps if I can respond, it really doesn't matter, because the bottom line is that the property is going to be free of shadow for most of the day in any event, and it will only be late in the day in wintertime that there's a shadow cast across the property. And as I said in my report, in wintertime is an average of, I think, 5 or 6, 7 cloud cover over metropolitan Adelaide. So days in midwinter, you're not likely to get discernible shadow in any event. So the shadowing that's created by the wall is not unreasonable, whether or not it's by a tree, a fence, or by the building on the boundary.
Okay, just one more question. Are you prepared to move that wall off the boundary?
It's not my decision. That's a decision that needs to be made by the applicant, but there's no need for the wall to be moved off the boundary. It's been supported by the council planning staff. The impact of the walls, in my view, is negligible. It's certainly not going to result in undue enclosure of the backyard or lack of air or any of those sorts of things that were raised in the submission. And I don't believe there is sufficient room to take that wall and move the building 900 across to move it off the boundary, because that will then constrain the central driveway access into the property.
Okay, with respect, we take we listen to the administration's advice but make an independent decision.
I understand that, and I wasn't questioning the process. I was merely saying that there's no need for it to be moved off the boundary, and the staff have recommended it be approved.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Brenton?
Yeah. David, just a quick question, separate to the boundary question that was raised. These are relatively large dwellings, it's about 240 square metres in area each, 3-bedroom. Each of them has a double garage. Because they've got a shared driveway arrangement for the rear dwellings, the 2, 4, rear 5 dwellings, can you give me some background? How's visitor car parking going to be dealt with in this circumstance? And is there sufficient room in terms of if a visitor was to park in front of the garage, that other cars could still enter and exit the site in the forward direction?
Well, the application's been independently assessed by the council's traffic engineers, and they've indicated that it's a workable solution. I think the report from the traffic engineer said at that central section between dwellings 3 and 4, it does get a little bit tight in terms of the passing space through there, which means that people have to be careful how they park their cars in those visitor spaces. But at the end of the day, it's been deemed to be a workable solution.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
It goes around the question, but it's close enough. Thank you.
Roger, did you have any questions?
Yeah, probably just it's a question, I suppose. David, just in response to the representor, just looking at the site plan and probably also the aerial photograph, it appears that the representor's dwelling or built area comes about halfway into that garage. What I'm saying is, it's not going to be the entire garage length doesn't abut the representor's dwelling, as far as I can see it from the site plan. I just wonder whether you've got a site plan in front of you, or we can get a site plan up, and just to clarify that is the case, and that's my reading of the plans.
Yes, that's the case. You can see the adjoining building is actually marked on the site plan, and the shadow plans and everything else, and it shows there's an overlap, I'm guessing, of about probably 3 metres, maybe more, 3.5, 4 metres. But of course, as you'd appreciate, in terms of overshadowing impacts, particularly in winter, the sun's low in the northern horizon, so the shadow cast to the south. And late in the afternoon in wintertime, that area is going to be in shadow from the fence in any event. Part of it will
sorry, mate. Just to clarify also that looking at the aerial photograph is that obviously there's no trees in that representor's open space area, but the actual tree is at I guess it's the front. I'm not sure how those units are configured, whether that's their own open space or whether it's part of the communal setup. But the representor maybe could give us a quick nod that where that tree is at the front of the property, is that their open space?
Roger, we might get the representative to come back because there were.
Yeah, I think that's just that question I should have asked before. That was all.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, David. That was all I had.
Can I just ask Ms. Pearce, are you able to just come back if there's no more questions from Mr. Hutchison? Mr. Hutchison, I'll let you take leave of your seat and I'll invite Nikki Pearce back to your seat.
Thank you. If there's anything that arises from the representative coming back,
we will call you back.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Pearce, there were two questions. One was the tree in the front there, whether it was deciduous or not. And the other question was whether that open space on the frontage to Catherine Street is your private open space or whether it's communal space.
It's strata land that up the front there where that garden bed is, and it's not a deciduous tree. That garden bed along that left-hand side of the lawn is strata land. So our outdoor living space under that laser light doesn't get shade from that tree.
Yeah. Okay. So if I just clarify, so that area under the tree is part of the strata common land.
Yeah, that's strata common land.
Thank you.
And in the shadow from 3 o'clock in the afternoon was the responder's estimate. In his response was 3 o'clock would be in shadow following winter.
Thank you.
Jenny, did that answer your question?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Not sure if did it answer your question, Roger?
Yep, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Yep, okay, done.
Okay, members, we've got two matters. We'll deal with them individually because they are separate applications of different content.
Sorry, Shanti, just to jump in there. Shanti, just to jump in. I don't think there's anything that came out of the representative's response that we need to have David come back to.
No, I don't
answer any questions.
So
I'm quite comfortable.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. There's questions for staff before we launch into discussing these two applications.
No, I don't think so. Not from me.
Nothing from me.
My quick question was, sorry, if I may, the garage sizes, I think they're 6 metres by 5.8. So staff are happy with those. They're slightly less, than the, no, they're not. They're exactly right. It's all right. No, that's right. No, my apologies. Sorry, I was misreading that. Sorry about that. Ignore that. Again.
Questions. Okay, members, so let's go into discussing the application. Number one we're talking about, which is the land division for whatever it is, 2 into 3 or whatever it is.
Yep.
Item number 1.
I certainly don't have any issue with the subdivision of the land at all. The blocks are plenty big enough to build a reasonable house on.
Yeah, I'm happy with the subdivision and for the 2 dwellings at the front, which is part of that one application as well.
Yeah.
I don't believe the impacts are such that it warrants any amendment to it, even though the floor areas or the site areas are slightly below what was prescribed. It's a pretty unique site and the potential to get some quality developments in there. The issue of the potential overshadowing, I mean, given that the adjoining issues are for land on the east side of the development, as those impacts are not going to be significant, in my opinion, and it's generally consistent with the policies in the plan.
So, Jenny, were you wanting to move
No, before I did that, I just wanted a little further discussion about that setback of that garage. I don't.
Roger, did you want to move?
I'm happy to move in terms,
Okay.
and if I just may comment on that as well, I don't believe there's any need to move that. It would make very little difference to what the representative sees as the issue of overshadowing, and there are plenty of boundary developments of a similar height and length and so on. So I'm comfortable with where it is. I don't believe that there's any need to suggest that change or to look at conditioning a change.
Someone willing to second?
Yeah, Shanti, I'm happy to second the motion. Just to make a brief comment as well, I think Roger has spelled it out fairly clearly. I think we need to look at this is an application for the subdivision and also for the two dwellings. I don't believe that the length of building on the boundary will have any significant adverse impact on the neighbour. If it was set back 900 mils, it really wouldn't make a great deal of difference in the scheme of things.
Thank you. Jenny, did you wish to discuss?
No, I don't think it needs to be discussed. I just wanted to hear what other people had to say on that particular issue. And I think you're right, it probably won't make the difference that the representative thinks it will, but perception is everything to their reality.
Indeed, and they live next door.
Exactly.
I do tend to agree with the comments that have been made. This is a bit of a unique site, however. It's not your ordinary run-of-the-mill site, and I think the work that staff have undertaken with the applicant to get it to this point is actually probably as far as they're possibly going to get it in terms of changing it. They are big dwellings, but it is a large, unusual site, and I think it's probably utilising the site as sensitively as they possibly can. So I'm actually supporting the motion that's been put. Any further discussion?
No, happy.
Okay, well, I'll put that motion. All those in favour, raise your hands.
Yep.
In favour, yep.
All those against, that's carried. So we'll move into item 2, which is for the land division for 5 allotments and 5 new double-storey dwellings.
Members had moved that one in terms, if you like.
Thank you, Jenny.
I certainly set back from the boundary, and I was quite pleased to see the one at the rear is just one at the rear and not more than that.
Yes, agreed. Do you have a seconder?
I don't know. No, I don't.
Yeah. Roger hasn't got his microphone turned on, so I'm happy to second it. But I will make a comment in seconding the motion. I think the design is good. I think they've worked the site very well in terms of the number of dwellings. As I said in the question to David Hutchison, these are large dwellings, and ideally I would like to see visitor car parking that's not associated with an individual dwelling for a development of this scale and this nature. But it meets the development plan requirements, it gets over the line, and I'm happy to second the motion.
Roger?
Yeah, with the car parking, I think they've probably got a fairly good result. In fact, you can double stack visitor car parks on those garages, and I think they'll work, which is probably, and in a sense, individual visitors, or there's probably you can fit 2 cars for each individual visitor for the dwelling. So I think that works okay. The question I had for staff was just a little bit about how much discussion was had about the permeability of the site, given that we're they're 10% or roughly over, and whether there was look at permeable paving and such like. Was that discussed with the applicant?
Not as far as I'm aware. We acknowledged that it was over the recommended
percentage permeability or impervious, but I'm not aware. It's 10% over, so we didn't enter into any discussions around that. It is something that could be revisited through a reserved matter if that was something you wanted to do. Up to you.
Yeah, I think if there are some words for a reserve matter, it may not change, but I guess given that there might be some more final landscape designs and so on, whether it's possible to have a reserve matter that further development of possible solutions to increase greater permeability.
There is a reserve matter.
Oh, is it? Oh, we've got one.
On the resolution already. I can add a dot point to that to seek revised plans to increase permeability within the site. Is that?
Yeah, I think, as I say, I'm not going to have a major issue if we can't get too much more. But I think it's something that could be explored given the reserve matter you've already got there as well. Thanks.
Jenny and Brenton, are you okay with that?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Okay.
I'm happy with that as well.
Any further discussion?
No.
All right. Well, I might put the matter. All those in favour, raise your hands.
Yep.
All those against? That's carried. Thank you.
Shanti, if I can just interject, I've just
Certainly.
invited Sandy into the meeting, so he's joining us as well.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, Sandy.
Yes. Good evening. Sorry I'm late.
We now move up to item 3, which is 285 Goodwood Road at Kings Park. We have no representatives who have confirmed their wish to speak. The applicant hasn't confirmed either, unless there's any updated information on that. Andy?
Sorry, yes, I do actually have Matt King is available if you need him to come up.
Okay. Members, do we need...
Yes, please.
Okay. If we could invite Matt King, please, to the meeting. Not necessary to speak to the application, but we've got some questions for you. So this application is 285 Goodwood Road at Kings Park, and it's a land division application for 6 allotments from 2 and the construction of 6 two-storey attached dwellings and associated garages. You got Matt there?
Hi, how are you going?
Good, how are you, Matt?
Thank you.
Now, I think there's some questions for you. I'll let, I think, Brenton, you had a few questions in you, and we've got some revised plans.
Yep. Matt, thank you for the revised plans. I know Roger has a question about fencing to Stanley Street. I'll leave that one for him. I just wanted to ask a question in relation to the visitor car parking space just adjacent to Goodwood Road. As you probably heard in the last item, I'd love to see visitor car parking spaces provided for a development of this nature. However, its proximity to Goodwood Road and the way that space is going to have to be used is vehicles likely would have to drive in a forward direction and reverse into the space, more than likely to utilise it. I'm more, this is one where I'd probably feel more comfortable without that visitor space in that location, whether it be used as for bin enclosures or just open space or anything. But I'm probably more nervous about having that visitor space in that location. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Like in terms of your analysis of accessibility, I think you're right. Without the applicant here, it's a little bit difficult for me to confirm, but I suspect in my discussions with the applicant that they probably wouldn't be adverse to, if it meant the application was likely to be supported by the panel, place for another purpose. There is a high amount of visitor parking on street, which I think we're improving the current scenario by a factor of 1 space. So I suspect the applicant would be comfortable that for residents visiting for visitors coming to the site to see residents, there's enough sort of parking in Stanley Street that we could lose that space if it's deemed necessary.
And just if I can ask one more question with that,
Sure.
rubbish bins for each of the dwellings, are they going to be located in the front courtyard on Stanley Street and taken out to Stanley Street, or will they come from the rear garaging area and brought out to Goodwood Road? Any thoughts on that?
I might just pull up the law plan.
Is anyone else having trouble hearing Matt because you're a bit muffled?
He's a bit quieter. I've turned my sound up.
Yeah, I think in terms of probably lot 6 is different to the other 5. Potentially lot 1 as well has got a little bit more side service yard space.
Mm-hmm.
The middle 4 dwellings, if it was my residence, if you look really closely, I'd be putting them in the garage. There's some really small spaces. I think they're designated in some little insets adjacent to laundry. I think that's the better location rather than putting them in your sort of primary courtyard, which is, they're sort of designed to be north facing and interact with the living spaces of the dwelling. So I think it's probably a double garage storage location, and then you'd wheel them out accordingly from there.
Right. Thank you for that.
Roger, I think you had some questions.
Yeah, probably just the one in relation. And I just noticed on the plans, it's shown as like item 9 was a 1.5 high aluminium vertical slatted infill panel as specified by the builder. The question was about the permeability of that, Matt, and obviously there's a balance between that front area of those dwellings is going to be used by the residents, but also it's certainly a policy in the plan about permeability. So can you just clarify how much that might be, or what you'd be looking at, or whether we need to condition it in some way?
So I understand that they're vertically orientated metal plates with millimetre gaps. We probably think that strikes an appropriate balance, Roger, between providing some transparency and views through to the public realm, but also balancing the need for that space to be private open space and not too open from the street.
Yeah, just following up on that, I didn't quite catch the width you mentioned, but is it 50%? If you're
10 millimetre, they're quite small.
10 millimetre gaps, and so how wide is the aluminium? Then that's a lot wider. Then is that?
Yeah, I'm corresponding with the designer by text message.
Yeah,
65 millimetre wide flat bar plates and 10 millimetre spaces between each.
Okay. So certainly a lot less than 50%. That's just, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question or two.
Thank you, Sandy.
On the fencing, would they be amenable to making the height of the fence more like 1,500 rather than 1,800, given that they're front fences and relying on edging and stuff like that, rather than having a solid fence that's going to obscure basically the views?
Look, it's hard for me to say because they're not present. If it became a fatal planning issue, I think Medallion would accept that as a compromise. I guess my only concern would be striking an appropriate balance between sort of privacy expectations for those courtyards. I think the development plan in this particular council, I think it's 1.7 metres is the kind of expectation for privacy management. So, that might be maybe we meet somewhere in the middle, maybe 1.6 metres or 1.7 metres might be.
It's about overlooking. It's not about fences.
But it's still about providing, I think, from those people that are within the courtyard, not making it necessarily easy for the people that are walking past to see sort of back into that space.
It's not good for passive surveillance to have high fence that are ostensibly solid that don't enable passive surveillance of the footpath. That some councils don't count front setbacks as private courtyards for this very reason, that then people then want to have them high and private rather than.
Sandy, if we can just leave questions to the applicant rather than debating the matter, please.
Okay. Next question. In terms of that visitor park that was asked about before,
Yes.
has consideration been given to increasing the setback of the easternmost dwelling by putting the garage across the end of the right of way and then using that visitor car park as a turnout area? Because at the moment, lot 1 house is well forward of the adjacent next door neighbour's dwelling, whereas if that garage was put across the end of the right of way, then that car could reverse into that could function as a reversing space, which would, rather than that unit's setting forward, it would actually set back and complement that adjacent house.
Wasn't intimately involved in designing the scheme, so I can't really speak on behalf of the architect. So I'm not too sure. Just so I can clarify though, Sandy, are you suggesting moving sort of the whole development, I think it's Westwood, so then there's space for so then you can...
No, talking about sliding house number 1 south. So
Okay.
the garage faces the right of way rather than the same orientation as the other ones, and that thereby it would gain bigger front setback.
Yeah, I'm not quite following. So if we brought you're suggesting bringing the dwelling on lot 1 southward, so it's in line with the remaining dwellings?
No, to the back of the right of way, so that their garage is at the end of the right of way rather than turning left into the right of way, into the garage.
I don't quite follow. I'm sorry. Gary, do you?
It's well forward of the adjacent bungalow on Stanley Street. And if that house was set further south with the garage across the end of the right of way, so the right of way would become shorter by the width of that house, then this visitor park could be used as a turnout area.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure it's entirely necessary. I think from a setback, if it's to solve a concern about setbacks from Stanley Street, I think the setbacks are largely acceptable. I acknowledge your comment about it being forward of the dwelling to the east, but I guess as a comparison to what's on the land at the moment, it's a substantial 2-storey unarticulated building, setback 4 metres, roughly in the place of lots 1 and 2 from Stanley Street. So I think the proposal actually provides a significantly better setback arrangement to what exists. And to that end, I don't think necessarily I'll call it a minor increase, but you might disagree, but any small increase in dwelling 1's setback from Stanley Street, I'm not sure it's going to have a material planning benefit, but I also retain the view that what we're proposing is an improvement on that current streetscape setting.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Sandy?
And has consideration been given to matching the ceiling height? No, it's only in the R350, it's not in the built form zone, but the ceiling heights of the proposal, and what's good about the proposal is that they're single story at the front with a courtyard that then gets the northern light over the single story section with the 2-story setback. But if there's consideration being given to increasing the ceiling height of the single-storey section at the front to match the ceiling height of the adjacent houses in the street, which is more like 3.3 metres.
Again, what wasn't involved at that level,
comparison.
designing and planning, and I'm not sure in this particular zone that level of sort of design or that level of design detail is necessary. I think what I would say though is that the street does comprise a number of bungalow style dwellings, and they typically adopt a lower sort of veranda element. I think it's fairly complementary. The zone also allows up to 2-storey development, and I don't necessarily even seek for you to set it back from the streetscape. So I think it's fair to consider what alternatives might reasonably occur under the terms of the zone. I think what's been presented is, I think it's a pretty good outcome in the context of what might otherwise be possible. But nonetheless, I think it's importantly complementary to bungalows, which are the primary, from my review of Stanley Street, they're certainly the primary dwelling.
Yeah, well, the bungalows got 3.3 metre ceilings, not 3 metre ceilings, so it's going to be by comparison, but thank you. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, members?
No.
No.
Okay, thank you for that. Matt, we might just go into the item itself. Members, do you have questions for staff? Jenny?
It was just one question, and I asked it of Andrew, if we could take that car park out at the front as a reserved matter, since that was the car park that the was in the parking report or whatever, the traffic report that said that car park was unusable, and maybe that it be landscaped as some other use.
Yeah, that's fine. We have a reserve matter provided by the email. Yeah, we'll put that into the.
Oh, that's if everybody else wants it, of course.
Yep, happy with that.
I'm happy with that as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes, Shanti, if I could, to staff, and I guess relates to reserve matter and the issue that I raised about the transparency and Sandy raised about the height of the fence. Can we? I think it'd be good to do that as a reserve matter, because I don't think it's the make or break. But in relation to the transparency and height of the front fencing, to be considered, or further assessment be reserved in relation to achieving greater transparency in accordance with development plan policy, and also a reduction in height to again in accordance with development plan policy.
That's fine. I've just drafted one. I've sent it to Lily.
Okay. You have very quick, Andrew. Well done. Oh, it's gone again. It's on the screen for a second there.
I'll just read it for you. Oh, maybe Lily.
Lily's on the ball there. Very good.
If you look in your chat, you'll see it.
Yeah. Just hang on. Well, you're just dealing with technophobes here. I mean, it's. I did see it for a second, but yeah, look, along those lines, anyhow, I think.
It needs to be reference to the height, not just the transparency.
Yeah, I said that, the height as well, yep.
With those additions, is someone willing to move into?
I'm happy to move if that's what you want in terms.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Seconded.
I'm happy to.
Off you go, Roger.
Happy to second that, yep.
Any discussion, members?
I'd just like to say that I was pleasantly surprised with the project having the design where, being on the south side of the road, that it has single-storey roof form with a courtyard with a 2-storey setback behind the courtyard, which is a design approach I often use, and it's a good one in a single-storey streetscape. So it's a second story is significantly set back and then doesn't present to the street at all. And so I think it's very good in that regard, and also that the planning staff have negotiated the rear access via a right-of-way off the rear. I think that is also to great merit of the proposal compared to having all garaging coming in off Stanley Street. So that is also good. I think being just the zone doesn't have some of the provisions that the built form zones do in terms of wall heights in relation to the bungalow. They are too low, but it's in the R350 zone where the development plan is not as strong on that sort of provision. Likewise with the setback in the 350 zone, it's not as good, strong. So it's a fairly good proposal. I can support.
Any other discussion? Jenny, did you wish to wrap up?
I've wrapped up.
Brilliant. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, raise your hands.
Yeah, but sorry, just
Sorry.
that reserved matter just hasn't picked up the height that was drafted that I'm seeing on my screen now. So
there a maximum height that you are?
1.5.
Well, I think.
Could I just? I might just point out that it is in the RB 350 zone. So fencing up to 2.1 doesn't actually need planning consent.
But however, I just think it should be included there. To fencing shall be designed to provide a degree of transparency and height to achieve improved amenities of Stanley Street or something like that. I just think it needs to be looked at and assessed as a reserved matter. That's all. Okay. I wouldn't prescribe anything, but.
And height, do we put there?
Just a reduction in height, nothing, not a number. I think is what we wanted.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Are you happy with that, Roger?
Yes, thank you. That's great.
Awesome. Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour?
Yep.
All those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to item 4, which is an application on Cremorne Street. Now, we do have a representative. Do we have Will Langford in the gallery? If you could join us, Will. Lovely.
Certainly.
I'm not sure if you were here earlier, but you have 5 minutes to present your case. We have received your written representation. It is in our material. If there's anything that you feel has not been adequately or appropriately covered in either the report or the material that you've already submitted, or indeed in the amended plans, your opportunity is now to present that to us.
Certainly. Did you just mention then amended plans?
I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen there, but there is an amended plan dated the 7th of May 2020.
We haven't seen those.
We'll let you proceed and we'll go from there because the amended plans may resolve some of the questions.
Certainly. Basically, as you said, you have all the information that we've sent through of our objection to the existing application. There's a few things that haven't been brought up that need to be brought to your attention. The existing fence size is actually 1.8 metres or 1,800, not 2.3. And also the actual existing structure that is in place is approximately 3.3 metres high. The original application was going to be 5.5 metres high at the top point, which of course then will obviously block out all our natural light and overshadow, etc., which we've obviously addressed with you. So that's all the extra information I have for you at this stage.
Members, do you have questions for Mr. Langford?
Does he have
I can ask one.
Yeah, sure. Go, Jenny.
From my observation on your northern wall, there were no windows. From discussion with staff, you can't see any on the northern wall upstairs when you can't see the downstairs. So I just wondered what was actually there.
Sure, there are very high windows downstairs on the northern facing wall. There's none upstairs, obviously. The property was only built 10 years ago, so there were privacy a couple of windows. There are very large, or actually very long windows downstairs, which do allow a lot of natural light into the property.
And what height are they set at?
That would be approximately 2.4 metres, I'd say.
4 metres?
2.4.
Oh, 2.4. So normal roof height.
Yes, roughly.
Thank you.
Now, I think someone else had a question.
Mine was the same question.
You had the same question, Sandy?
I couldn't observe the windows.
Okay. Can we have, I don't think we've got any further questions for now, Mr. Langford, but we may need other points of clarification. So if you could stay tuned. Do we have Mr. Tran available? We invite Mr. Tran to speak. Thank you, Mr. Tran.
Hi there. Hi there.
Mr. Tran, we've received your application and obviously we have a report before us. You now have 5 minutes to present your case.
From our perspective, really, everything that is, in our view, is necessary or relevant to the development application.
I might just get you to come a bit forward to the laptop so that we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, as I was saying, from our perspective, we believe anything that is sort of necessary or relevant to the development application, we have already sort of relayed that to council via discussions, our submissions, and also further correspondence, which is from our reading, it sounds like it's all captured quite nicely in the report that you have before you. So from our point of view, we really have nothing else to add one in time. Happy to take any question. Yeah, that's all we have to say.
And we may well have some, so don't run away. So members, did you have any questions?
I have a question.
Sandy, thank you.
Mr. Tran, you've currently got a double garage in that location, which is the optimum location for a garage for a dwelling like this. Have you considered building the additional accommodation in a stable type building above a garage in the current location rather than in front of the veranda, return veranda and gable it near the front of the house, which I've got reservations about?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Can you please repeat?
Yes. Have you given consideration to leaving the garage where it is and building the accommodation above the garage with a 2.4 metre low ceiling above the garage in a stable?
On top of the garage?
Yes. Side-by-side parking and not having a garage at the front, which would spoil the look of the front of the villa.
That's something that we quickly, that was not something that we considered, no, in short, because for starters, the current garage or shed is quite run down. We really don't want to build anything on top of that. The other consideration...
That actual garage, just that location. Demolishing that garage, but building a new garage, double garage in its same place with accommodation.
Oh, right. No. I mean, because the whole... when the applicant came to us, the purpose of this development was really just to create a small little outbuilding. So there was no, I guess, it wasn't part of the brief to build additional garage in the new development. One of the main reasons for that is we wanted to keep the proposed dwelling as small and compact as possible. So as you can imagine, if we were to add some car parking in the form of a garage in that location, the overall its building form would be a lot bigger than in its current form. And the other thing that was taken into consideration, which may or may not be obvious to the panel here, but given the current site, options for developing is quite limited in relation to where the main dwelling is located. There's and then the swimming pool that's adjacent that's the dwelling. So in terms of positioning of the new proposed building, we were quite limited in terms of where we can actually locate the proposed building. I hope I answered your question.
I'm talking about an attic type accommodation above the garage in the same location.
I think the applicant's answered the question, Sandy, so we might leave it there because we are now getting into the territory of redesign. Any other questions?
No, not for me.
Okay, we might let you take your seat, Mr. Tran. Members, questions for staff?
Shanti, very quick question. The application plans we have before us are the amended application plans dated 7th of May 2020. Are they the same plans that went on public exhibition that the representative has seen? Or is it, and can you explain, or can staff explain the differences between the plans that we have and the ones that went on public exhibition?
That's a good question. Thank you, Brenton.
Yeah, I'll just clarify that. Just towards the final steps of the assessment, we noticed there was some just inaccuracies with the drawings. That they showed the roof structure projecting over the boundary and a couple other small matters. And so we asked the applicant to correct those, and they supplied the amended plan. So it didn't change the development overall. It just brought the roof structure to the boundary rather than oversailing it.
So just to clarify, it has no material effect on the form and scale of the building itself or the use of the building, which would give rise for the representative to have an opportunity for a further comment on these new plans.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
I've got a question of staff. Was there discussion about the approach that I was talking about of leaving the garaging where it is and building above the garage, and was this referred to Council's heritage architect? Because I've got serious reservations about the future location of a carport in front of the return veranda and gable on this corner return veranda villa.
It was referred to our heritage architect comments report, and in relation to an alternative design, no, we didn't make any comment on that.
Andy, just having trouble hearing you there.
Sorry. In terms of the our heritage architect's comments there in the report, and in relation to an alternative design, we didn't discuss that with the applicant. We just assessed the particular design that was in front of us.
So, Sandy, in answer to your question, page 306 of your agenda papers. Members, I'm in your hands as to how you want to proceed with this.
If I could start, I think when you have a corner properties which are highly visible like this, it's very important that the garaging is handled in an appropriate way, and supporting the replacement of the garage in the location where it should be, off the side street, and replacing that with an outdoor room, which then forces the undercover car parking to the front of the dwelling, is not wise or good planning. And you can see on that plan that's on the screen that what they're showing is a carport in a location which would definitely detract from that return veranda villa that everyone drives past on Duthie Street. And it's completely unnecessary if the garaging was just maintained in its current location. Any form of garage or carport in front of that return veranda or that side gable of that house is going to detract from this contributory item in the historic conservation zone. If I was providing, and you can see on the plan that they've even saying, when I visited the site, there was a blue car parked on the front lawn, and on the plan here, what's shown is actually a paved car park in the front setback of the building. That's even worse. So this is all as a consequence of not utilising the garage in its current location. So I'm looking to move to deferral to have the option of them leaving the garage in its current location and building above it, explored by the applicant.
Sandy, I'm feeling a bit anxious about such a motion because that's about redesign. Our job here is to make a decision on the application. So unless you're deferring the application to seek further information, I'm not able to accept that. Brenton?
Shanti, just continuing on with Sandy's comments. Yeah, I think what Sandy's talking about is a Fonzie flat. It's the best way to describe it, which is the garaging at the ground floor, residents above, making use of the site. In the ideal world, I think happy days.
Exactly.
That's right. I'd be very comfortable with that approach. It would increase the height of the building. It would increase the potential impact on the adjacent neighbour to the south. But because it's a two-storey building to the south, I wouldn't be unhappy with that particular approach. However, that's not the application we have in front of us. And I think a deferral to seek that option is probably a full redesign of the application, and it would need to go through a full process once more. I think we need to make a decision on this application that's before us rather than actually a redesign in that form. But I think the concept that Sandy has come up with, I think, has substantial merit. And if that was what we were put before us tonight, I'd be happy with that as well.
Well, thank you, Brenton. I don't think we should be supporting a proposal that basically has the direct effect of forcing the carport and garaging to be in a location where we know it would detract from the contributory
So,
item.
Sandy, the debate here is whether I'm prepared to accept your proposal for a deferral to redesign it, which I'm not prepared to accept. But if you're proposing to move some alternate motion, I'm happy to
so my alternate motion is that it be refused on the basis of not satisfying Principle 45.
Do you have a seconder?
No, I think it's foolish to support getting rid of garaging where it should be when we know it's going to have a bad consequence of where the carport's going to be.
Is someone willing to second that motion?
Can I just ask the question Sandy has said about in conflict with PDC 45? Is that because the development doesn't provide one covered car parking space? Is that?
Yeah, well, that's all that I could see in the development, that plan that we have to go on. And the only way they can have an undercover car space is having it in front of either the veranda, the return veranda leading to the front door, or that gable to Duthie Street. If it was a carport on the other side of the house, it wouldn't matter. But with a corner villa, which is designed to address both streets with a veranda wrapping round and a gable to both things, they're not meant to have structures. Both aspects is considered a frontage of a return veranda corner villa like this. So having a carport in front of that structure would detract from that villa. And so they can't meet that principle of providing one undercover car park without offending the the setting of the contributory item.
My further comment on this is that if they were to demolish that garage, they wouldn't need is a consent of right, I would have thought, to demolish that. They wouldn't have any undercover car parking at all. So my view is I don't believe there's sufficient force in the development plan to refuse this application for an outbuilding of the form proposed, because that argument is not strong enough in my opinion. I can understand what Sandy's saying about what potentially may happen, but that's what we would need to wait and see if they did make application for it. But when we're looking at this application as it currently is, the fact that you remove an undercover car parking space is not, I don't believe, grounds to refuse an application, because that could be done anyhow by the applicant.
Well, when the application comes in for a carport in that location that's flagged, as a heritage advisor, I wouldn't be supporting a structure forward of the building in that location.
We'll wait. We'll see if we get an application and how staff handle it or not. But I think staff have alluded to that an application would be required and would be assessed against the policies.
And the location where it's indicated is an undesirable one, which would offend the...
Do we have a seconder for this motion? Well, it looks like we haven't got a seconder for this motion, so that's going to lapse.
That's regrettable.
Members, I'm still in your hands as to how you wish to proceed on this matter.
I might have a go at this if I can. I totally support the views that Sandy has raised about the garaging on the Doothie Street side. I think there is an opportunity for that to occur, but we have to make a decision on the application that's before us tonight. There is a very strong likelihood that should an application be lodged for a carport as shown on the future car park site, it may not get approved, and therefore the applicant may wish to consider a new application on this site in the location as Sandy has suggested for a Fonzie flat garaging facility at ground level and dwelling above. Notwithstanding that, I think we have to make a decision on the application before us, and I'm happy to support the motion as put forward by staff.
And advice to that effect, Brenton, would be would put them on notice would be a good idea.
Do you have a second of your motion, Brenton?
If Brenton could consider that.
If I can, before there's a seconder, I'd be nervous to put a advice in the recommendation, given that that's prejudging an application that hasn't come before this panel. I would rather the applicant is, or the applicant's representative is in the gallery, is hearing the conversation. I'd feel very nervous about a carport in that location, but until we actually formally see it, I can't actually put a position there. But I would very much encourage the concept of garaging in the existing location with an upper story dwelling above. Upper story dependent accommodation above that. But I wouldn't want to put it in the motion.
Okay.
Do we have a seconder? Members, this is getting really difficult.
Jenny's got a hand up.
Jenny's
thank
seconding.
I guess I'm happy to second that. Looking at that diagram again, the diagram shows 4 cars, I think, in the driveway. And while they won't be the easiest cars to get in or to have stacked parking, they're clearly able to fit behind the gable of that particular dwelling. And unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to stop people parking in their front yard should they choose to do so, regardless of how dreadful it looks and how much it detracts from a neighbourhood. They will still do that, can still do that in any case. So I'm happy to support this particular motion, although I would agree with Sandy and with Brenton. The other alternative would have been better, but that's not what's in front of us.
Any other discussion, members?
I just say that I can tell with my design expertise that any carport in that location is going to detract from that villa, and I wouldn't be supportive of it in that location.
I'll put the motion unless Brenton, you wish to sum up.
I think just summing up in the issue that Sandy has raised about the alternate location for a carport, it's probably worth noting that the Heritage Advisor has not made any comments on that particular option, and that will be the subject of a future application should it be lodged. So I think if they get negative feedback, if the applicant gets negative feedback from the Heritage Advisor at their early stages, they may wish to consider the opportunity of garaging at the ground floor in the existing location with dependent accommodation above. So that's summed up.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Yep.
All those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move on to item 5, which is 6 Dudley Street at Parkside. We have a representative, Jerry Carobbo. Jerry, are you there? If you could come to the seat, the allocated seat. Thank you, Jerry. Hopefully you've been watching proceedings. You have 5 minutes to speak to your representations. Your representation, I should say. We do have a copy of the material that you have already submitted to council, so we're aware of the issues that you have with this application. If there's anything that you feel that we are not aware of, please share that with us. And any other material that you think is relevant to this application.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. The proposed development at 6 Dudley Street, saying something about the proposed development. I'm representing my parents who are both 88 years old and own and live at the property next door at 8 Dudley Street for over 53 years. My parents still totally object to the proposed development for a few reasons and concerns. First of all, they object to the 5.8 metre wall, long wall and 3 metre high boundary wall, of which a quarter of the length of the wall will intrude into our carport, right in front of our front door. The character of our property will be affected and look terrible, and we'll think that the character of 6 Dudley Street as well. They're very concerned about damage to the driveway, damage to the carport, and if the post that holds the roller door moved during excavations, the roller door might not work properly, and then there will be reduced lighting under the carport. Because the boundary wall intrudes into the carport, the weatherproof carport, the carport won't be weatherproof from rain. Water will get in the carport from the gap left between carport gutter and boundary wall. And then concerns about the fence getting damaged during construction. And then in regards to the proposed garden space at the rear of the proposed development, we have concerns about stormwater and irrigation seeping under the fence line into our carport. Then they go on, they're not going to allow any access to our property for demolition, construction work, and for the work personnel, materials entering site from our property at any time except for bricklayers to brick up boundary wall and only, and plasterers to render boundary wall only. Decision made by them of the colour of the render. And then if it goes ahead, they want guarantees that everything will be fixed up if anything is damaged. And then just in closing, instead of absolutely destroying the look and character of our property and their property, which is a bluestone return around veranda dwelling, the proposed development is at the front of both properties and will look absolutely shocking. For a proposed little construction of an ensuite and a walk-in road, we strongly and totally object to the proposed development as it would absolutely destroy the character of both properties.
Thank you, Mr. Carobbo. Members, do you have any questions? No questions? No questions? All right. Well, we might hear from the applicant. Thank you, Mr. Carobbo. Do we have Matt King speaking on behalf of SW Architects?
9 years. Yeah, like in terms of the concerns expressed, there are a number of concerns expressed regarding what I'll consider to be civil matters, those matters pertaining to potential impacts on fencing and during construction, they're not planning considerations. So whilst I appreciate those concerns, they're not town planning considerations. They're considerations that need to be taken at the appropriate time during construction. From a character standpoint, we had no involvement in the sort of planning application of this particular proposal, but I understand that the architect has made concessions and worked with his staff, and there's support from Council's Heritage Advisor. Concessions were made, I understand, in respect to matters of design detail, principally the height, removal of some coin work, and provision of a darker colour, so to be, I guess, less obvious against the existing dwelling. We understand we've got support of Mr. Stevens. In terms of the impact on the represental's amenity, I appreciate those concerns, but in our view, and it's the view shared by planning staff, putting the building on the boundary adjacent carport and front yard area isn't likely to have an impact on any habitable rooms, and certainly not any private open space. So we consider the impact on their amenity to be an acceptable one. Finally, in terms of stormwater management, I understand that the addition has provision for capturing and disposing of stormwater, and that will all need to be via its own guttering system to the street water table. So no water is allowed to be, and the plans don't indicate that it will be discharged to the represental's property. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you.
No questions from me.
No questions. Any other questions, members? No questions. Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, have a good night. See everyone.
Members.
Shanti, I'm happy to move as recommended. The neighbours' concerns, whilst the representative was expressing the concerns of his parents, I don't believe it's going to have a significant impact on their amenity. The construction issues certainly need to be appropriately addressed. Any drainage issues or impact or damage to any of their property needs to be addressed by the applicant through the construction process. But overall, I think it's a reasonable development. Happy to support it.
Thank you, Brenton. Do you have a seconder? Anyone else willing to second that motion?
Jenny's hand went up very quick.
Jenny? Thank you, Jenny. Jenny's muted. If we could be unmuted, please, that would be helpful.
There we go. Yes, I'm happy to second that. I was a little bit disappointed with the veranda design. It would have looked a lot better if they'd sorted out the garage issues on the western side. But I can live with it the way it is. But I'm surprised the Heritage Advisor didn't make that suggestion. He said, well, it's not good now and therefore it's okay to stay not good. But other than that, it's fine.
Can Sandy be unmuted, please?
You hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Further to what Jenny's saying, it's possible to have an advice to the effect that it is suggested that the applicant liaise with Council's Heritage Architect regarding the improvement to the carport on the western side, so as to make it a separate structure from the veranda. As they're changing the veranda for this proposal anyway, they could make it the same on both sides.
I might just get some advice from staff on that.
The development plan specifically speaks against those extruded verandas becoming a carport as it is now.
We ordinarily wouldn't put a note or advice on a planning consent which didn't relate to the actual development or related to a possible future development. The advice of our heritage consultant can be sought at any time by the applicant. We recommend that it wasn't something that would be appropriate for that panel.
They are changing the veranda, that's the thing. As they are changing the veranda as part of this this proposal, that's why that's the nexus, which I think gives rise to an advice pertaining to the veranda.
Sandy, can I just clarify, are you seeking a reserve matter to deal with a design question, or are you seeking an advisory note?
An advisory note. That consideration be given to making the veranda the same on both sides.
Are you referring, just for clarity, Sandy, are you referring to the pitch of the roof?
No.
So at the moment, the veranda wraps on both sides of the house, and they are pulling the veranda back so it returns onto the front facade at the western end, adjacent where the ensuite is, and they could do exactly the same at the eastern end. And thereby
Sandy, it would be my advice that that's not an advisory note. That is an additional design element to the application. So it would be seeking something outside the scope of the approval if it was to be granted.
And we talk about redesigning something that is being presented to us in any event?
Well, that's why I'm putting it as an advice. I didn't think we were limited in that way with an advice.
Gary?
As a move for the motion, can I have a go at that? Jerry, just a comment is if we were putting an advisory note on, that would be encourage the applicant to lodge a new application for the veranda change because it's not part of this application.
Yeah.
So I think that's more of a discussion with the heritage advisor and the applicant separate to the application process. Should they wish to consider bringing the building back to more of its original intent, this is an option they could consider, but that's not the application that's before us at the moment. So I'm nervous about an advisory note on this particular application, but I'm happy for the heritage advisors to talk to the applicant at any stage on this sort of thing. I'm in your
Given
hands.
they're changing the veranda as part of this development application, the heritage architect should have had that discussion about changing the veranda.
Well, they didn't, Sandy, so we're dealing with it as it is.
Or they may have the discussion, we don't know. So
yeah. Gary, can you give us some guidance, please?
I think I'd have to concur with Brenton's commentary there, and I think it's probably outside the scope of what we're dealing with tonight, and we can certainly take that under advice. And the applicant's representative has heard the conversation as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Jenny, who moved this? I'm lost now.
I seconded it. Brenton moved it.
I moved.
Do you want to sum up, Brenton?
Summed up.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Raise your hands. Yep. All those against? That's carried. Now, we're going to put you offline, Roger. You can go and get yourself a cup of tea. And we'll excuse you from the meeting and get you back in when we're ready for the next item. Gary, are you able to orchestrate that? Great, thank you. He's gone. So next application is 10 Greer Street at Hyde Park. Do we have Mike Cooney available, representative? Great. Thank you, Mr. Cooney. Welcome. Sorry to have kept you this long. We have received your written material. It's in our pack. You have 5 minutes to present your case to us, and any other material that you think that perhaps we haven't got access to that might be relevant to your representation.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Look, I've got no objection per se to the pool and the positioning of the pool, which is on the the western boundary of number 10, which is my eastern boundary. My only alarm was when I first saw the application and the positioning of the pool pump plant. It's positioned between the two properties, number 10 and number 12, the two dwellings. The gap between the two buildings is roughly 1.8, maybe 1.9 metres between the two buildings. So that straight away rang some alarm bells with me. And subsequent to putting in my original objection, done a little bit more research, and I got to speak to the EPA regarding noise level limits for plant, i.e. air conditioners, pool pumps and central vacuum cleaning units. And it's all covered in this document produced by the state EPA. And I'd just like to read one section of this document out to you, which specifically relates to positioning of plant between two buildings as is proposed in this case. And I'll read it verbatim. Selecting an installation position. The siting of, and they say air conditioner, but you read that as equipment. So the siting of the equipment is the most important factor in ensuring that noise is not going to be intrusive. Placing the unit at the side of your house, close to the neighbour's house, is likely to create excessive noise, as the noise is trapped and reflected between the walls and eaves of the two houses. The fence has limited value in reducing the noise in this situation unless it is solid and is as high as the eaves of one or both of the houses. So that's pretty much the situation we have. And what this effectively says to me that all other reasonable and practical options for siting the pool plant must have been exhausted before you would place it between the two buildings. In fact, the gentleman at the EPA that I spoke to sort of said this was a no-no as far as they're concerned, siting between two buildings. If there's another reasonable and practical option available, that should be pursued. This is the last resort situation to locate the plant between the two buildings. So my point is, we've got a 1.2 metre garden strip on the left-hand side, which is the western side of number 10, and I think it's 1.1 metre across the back. And I thought it would be reasonable and practical to locate the plant either one of those two strips, ideally at the back, in the 1.1 metre wide strip at the back, which is a planted area, rather than between the two houses. If that can't be accommodated, well, it looks like we've got to have the plant situated between the two houses. And it goes on to say, if pool equipment must be put at the side of a house because no reasonable distance from a neighbour can be found, a practical alternative is to reduce the noise level. The noise level is to install an acoustic enclosure.
I'm going to have to get you to wrap up there because you're into 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. So what's been said in this application is an acoustic enclosure is to be installed by the tenant, which is a bit of a cop-out, I think. Why isn't the pool contractor providing an acoustic enclosure? How does the tenant know or the owner of the property, how does he know what to install there that's going to be suitable? Just to say an acoustic enclosure by the owner, to me, is not good enough. It needs to be something designed by a professional person. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, do we have... no, we haven't had a confirmation from Prescient Pools. We might just, unless is there anyone in the gallery for the applicant, Gary or Andy?
No.
No.
No, okay, well, we'll go straight into the matter that we have for us for consideration, members.
If I could speak.
Yep. Having trouble hearing you there, Sandy.
Keeps going on to mute. These sort of pool pumps and like air conditioners in this sort of location can be quite problematic. With the Adelaide City Council have had many dealings with the noise issues with this sort of thing. Things can be done such as the pool equipment can be put in a pit with a soundproof lid so that's actually under the ground, and then obviously the sound is well attenuated. So if it's to go in the current location, if it was in a pit with a soundproof lid, that would solve the problem. As it is just put acoustic box by owner with no particulars of that, it then comes down to the EPA complaints down the track. If it doesn't satisfy the EPA requirements, it'd be better to address it at this time when consent is being sought, in my view. I think it would be prudent to either approve this with a reserve matter on the particular details of the acoustic treatment of the pool pump, or deferred for that to seek that information, which is provided.
Is that a question for staff, Sandy?
Yes.
There's probably two things I'll point out just in relation to the EPA guidance for this type of equipment. It does say give a recommendation for a daytime noise level of 52 decibels and a nighttime level of 45 decibels. The proposed pump does meet that requirement on its own without any housing. There is proposal to have housing with this, so that would further attenuate the sound. However, if it was a matter that was we could do that to say the pump could be relocated. As it would do that as a reserve matter, relocated at least it would be recommended 5 metres from the nearest habitable room window. That'd be in line with policy. If you have an alternative location, then you could nominate that and we could build that into the reserve matter.
Yep, that would be fine.
So, Sandy, are you willing to move that
move
matter?
the reserve matter. And perhaps if the reserve matter could make the suggestion about potentially locating it in a pit.
Or just relocating it, surely.
Yeah, I'm not sure reserve matter can be quite so
specific.
I've got a draft here. Would you like me to read that out?
That'd be helpful. Thank you, Andy.
Reserve matter requiring an amended site plan to be provided showing the pool pump equipment being positioned a minimum of 5 metres from the nearest adjoining habitable room window. That's sufficient, or would you like a mention?
And particulars of sound attenuation.
It's already got the decibels on it above that.
And details of sound attenuation enclosure.
Yes.
Do you have a seconder for that?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Jenny.
Can I ask a question of staff? The reserve matter as is written at the moment is requiring the relocation of the pool pump equipment from the location that's being proposed at the moment. I'm not unhappy with the location, provided that the insulation around the equipment is of sufficient quality, whether it be in the ground or whether it be in a box, which is of sufficient quality to actually minimise the noise attenuation from the pool equipment. So, whilst the sentiment's right, but if for some reason that's the best location, if it's either under the ground or if it's in a box which actually achieves all of the acoustic benefits, I'm quite happy.
Well, we have a mover and a seconder for that motion. So is there any further discussion, members?
Can I refer a question to the chair?
No, sorry, you've had your chance.
So further to Brenton's thing, after enclosure, we'd have the word or details of sound attenuation.
I'd probably just point out to the panel that the details that they have provided of the pump
meet requirements.
Would meet the requirements currently. So if we were to look at this as a compliance matter, we would deem it compliant with the EPA guidance.
Members, for fear of going around in circles here, the material that's been submitted by the applicant, which we have in our paperwork, meets the EPA requirements. So I'm not really sure what the problem is that we're trying to solve, particularly if you've got this, particularly if you have this reserve matter in place as well.
Shanti, we're just, and Andrew and I have just been contemplating, there is the final note included in the recommendation which talks specifically about the noise levels.
Yeah.
If that can be added into the recommended condition 3 that talks about attenuation, and then we can add in the specifics of 45 and 52 decibels between those hours, that'll be a very specific condition that would be enforceable as per any compliance matters.
That puts the applicant on notice. I think that's an excellent idea.
Are you happy with that, Sandy and Jenny?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Shanti, that would be in place of the reserve matter.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
Shanti, can I just add to that? I think that's an excellent idea because what it does is it's a condition that's a reserve matter. They can't actually undertake the work without actually dealing with the reserve matter in the first place. Whereas the condition is something that is imposed on the development that must be met
forever.
Going on in for,
when the pump becomes noisy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the purposes of who am I talking to? Mr. Cooney. If it should become a problem, this condition means that you can ring up council and say it's a problem, but you would have to demonstrate that it wasn't meeting those noise standards.
Sorry, that's the last bit. What did you say?
We would need to be convinced that the pool pump is not meeting these noise standards, which are the EPA noise standards. 52 decibels between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. and 45 decibels between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. on any day. So that's essentially the standards that you were referring us to.
Yep.
Any further debate on the matter, members?
No.
Sandy, did you wish to sum up?
Summed up.
We'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Yep.
All those against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cooney. We now move to 19 Whistler Avenue, Unley Park, and we might invite Gary back into the meeting.
Roger's back.
Sorry, not Gary, Roger, sorry. Gary's there. We invite Roger back.
Roger has returned.
Lovely. Roger, thank you. Hopefully you managed to stretch your legs and get yourself a cup of tea or whatever your liquids are. 19 Whistler Avenue at Unley Park. It's an application to remove a tree and the recommendation is for refusal. I believe some additional material has been submitted to us since the agenda was published. Staff members who wishes to speak, I'm not fussed.
There's no representatives?
No.
Then I'm happy to move in terms of...
Sorry.
Is the applicant here since it's recommended for refusal?
To speak when we have a refusal. Sorry, I'm trying to. Now, who do we have?
My name's John Farnsworth. I'm the owner of the property.
Sorry, John.
Yep.
I do have you listed here. I'm sort of jumping the gun. John, I don't know if you've been in the gallery all this time, but you have 5 minutes to present your case. We have got the additional material that was sent through in support of your application. You have 5 minutes to present your case.
Yeah, so my family and I are primarily applying for the removal of this tree on safety grounds, but also argue that it is not worthy of preservation for character, amenity and habitat reasons as per the Development Act. But this tree is a lemon-scented gum, approximately 25 metres tall. It's situated in our front garden and stands about 8.5 metres from the front wall of our house. The canopy is rather large. It overhangs the front of the house, the front garden, the driveway and the public footpath. There's a significant past history of dropping significant limbs as per the examples in our handouts, some of which are over 5 metres long and 10 centimetres wide. The largest limbs oversail the master bedroom. My family often plays in the front garden. We park our car beneath the tree. So these limbs are like spears, and given the size of the tree, if it or a significant limb were to fall and fall onto the house or a person below, the consequences would be catastrophic. No amount of pruning will ever remove this risk. As stated, we believe this tree is inappropriate to be situated so close to a dwelling, primarily due to the risk to person and property. However, we're arguing that it should also be removed as per the Development Act, as it is not a rare, endangered or indigenous to the local area. It is not an important habitat for native fauna. It does not make an important contribution to the character or amenity of the local area, and is not a notable visual element. Firstly, lemon-scented gums are not locally indigenous. They originate from New South Wales and Queensland and is not listed as rare and endangered by the National Parks and Wildlife Act. Secondly, the tree is not an important habitat for native fauna, as there are no nesting hollows observed, which is reflected in the Council Arborist report. I quote, "The tree is linked to a wildlife corridor. However, as an introduced species that does not display nesting sites or hollows for Indigenous fauna, it provides limited habitat value. The locality is also densely vegetated with many other tall and mature trees along Brown Hill Creek, so the removal of this tree will have very negligible consequences." With respect to making an important contribution to the character and amenity of the local area, Whistler Avenue is lined with jacarandas, Queensland box trees and some London plane trees, which make a pretty much continuous tree canopy down the street. Firstly, the lemon-scented gums are not characteristic species of this locality, unlike jacarandas, London planes and box trees. Secondly, the tree provides limited shade as it mostly covers our land. Finally, it is also mostly screened by the trees already lining the street, most of which are evergreen. This can be seen in the photos in the handout, where the view of the tree is mostly from the front yard of the house and in front of the house. This is also supported by the Council Arborist report, which states, while it is a large tree, it could not be considered to be an eminent, notable or striking example of the species and is therefore not a visual element of the local area. So we don't intend on developing the front yard. We're not going to build anything. We're just going to landscape it in keeping with the neighbourhood. So as stated, our objective is to make it safe.
Members, do you have any questions of Mr. Farnsworth?
Probably only one question from me. Do you know how old the tree is?
How old the tree is?
Yeah.
From what I picked up, I think it's between 25 and maybe 30 years old.
Thanks.
Any other questions, members?
I'm just wondering how long Mr. Farnsworth and his family have lived in that dwelling.
It's coming up in about 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farnsworth. I don't think we've got any further questions. We'll let you take your seat. Allow us to deliberate over this matter. Members?
I was going to move in terms before, so I'm quite happy to move for refusal. If you want me to go ahead with that.
Yep, unless there's any other conversations or questions from members. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Sandy, thank you.
I'm going to provide an alternate view, is that I've had lemon-scented gums in a house that I own once. They grow very quickly, they drop branches. They're probably not the most ideal tree in a front yard or backyard of a house close to a dwelling. The only reason this is captured is because it's in the table of trees in the development plan. And should this motion be lost, I would move for approval to remove the tree.
Okay, thank you. Roger?
I've had a good look at this, and I think it's marginal in a sense, but it really comes down to, I think, how you look at Principle 6A, and I'm on the view that on balance, it does make an important contribution to the character or amenity of the local area. I'm not convinced by URPS about, because there's lots of other trees in the street, that suddenly that just makes a tree such as this, of its size and its character and its nature, suddenly becomes not important. I don't agree with that argument. We haven't received any advice from landscape architects and such in relation to that. And I think the fact that it's quite a different sort of tree when you look at that, the form of that tree and its nature. So I'm of the view that it does make an important contribution. And then we're moving on to the other principles about whether a tree should be removed. There's no evidence to suggest that it's diseased or its life expectancy is short, etc. I won't go through all those points that have been raised by council staff, and certainly there's no evidence to suggest any of those reasons would apply to allow for the tree's removal. But I don't disagree with Brenton about some of the issues with lemon-scented gums. My view on this is, and as the applicant's planners have argued, that if it wasn't listed in the council development plan, well, it could be removed as of right under the legislation. However, that's an issue for council to consider in its policies and what it may want to do in the future about these sorts of trees if it considers that they no longer comply with a listing as a significant tree. So I think this is marginal. I understand where the applicant's coming from, but I believe where it should be refused to take the tree down.
Now, Jenny.
Yes, I'm happy to sum up. Yes, it is marginal, but in this instance, the tree is, I guess, in my opinion, should live another day. It's certainly surrounded by other trees, as Roger has said, but given Unley's desire to try and meet state government targets of canopy cover, if we let every tree that come down because there's another one just like it somewhere else, then we're never going to make that. That's never going to happen, and we'll see a decrease in canopy just continue to escalate in the next few years, and that's not what we want.
I'll put the motion then. All those in favour?
Yes.
All those against? That's carried. Thank you, members. And thank you, Roger. You put that very eloquently, which is why I didn't feel I needed to say anything.
Oh, thank you.
We now move to item number 8, which is a non-complying application to proceed at 38 Anzac Highway, Everard Park. I do believe that we have Mr. Richard Dwyer confirmed.
Sorry to interrupt it, Shanti. Richard didn't turn up, so there's no one on that item.
Clearly he felt not necessary to come and put his case. Questions for staff? How do we wish to proceed, members?
Shanti, I'm happy to start off with this one if you like. I think the proposal has merit. Whilst it's got a commercial use as part of the proposal, this is a site, it's a large site, it's on a major arterial road, it's been underutilised for a long, long time. I think that certainly demonstrates merit, and I'd like to see it go through the assessment process, through public exhibition, commentary from Dipty, etc. Without second guessing the planning merits. I think it has sufficient merit to warrant dealing with the application further. I'm happy to move as recommended.
Thank you, Brenton. Do you have a seconder?
Jenny there.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Jenny. Sorry, I'm just plugging my computer in before I go.
No, that's okay. I'm happy to second that. I think given its location, given what's being built on the other side of whatever that little street is called, it's inevitable that this sort of development will be proposed for Anzac Highway, and I think it's important that we consider it.
Grove Avenue, I think it is.
Yep.
Good.
Can I ask a question of staff in relation to whether they have had any discussion with the applicant in relation to what they are proposing to put in there in relation to the extent of how much residential development would work, or from the staff's point of view?
We've commented on a number of applications for the site, probably over the last 18 months. There's been a mix of wholly residential and a mix of commercial and residential. This one came in and we provided some comments and they amended. Generally the feedback was positive in terms of proceeding to an assessment. We highlighted some issues around access and the land use. We did comment on its proximity to the Arcadian development on the other side of Grove Avenue. And they've seemed to have taken those comments on board.
Yeah, I suppose my comment would be about this is an area that where the plan seeks some more intense development in Unley, which is a rare thing in allotment size, and we know we've heard of some applications down there, and I suppose the fact that we're only going to get a limited number of dwellings out of it is 4 dwellings on what is a pretty big site. I think that's my only issue with this. I'm happy for it to go ahead. I just think that I think will be an issue for discussion if it comes back in its current form.
Following from what Roger's saying, I think that the proposal with a whole lot of at-grade parking on a large site like this is a wasted opportunity, and really a site and a development of this size ought to have undercroft parking, and in terms of merit, I don't have much issue with the office component, but it would be it's a shame that iconic modernist building, whilst it's always been deliberately derelicted, but most architects in South Australia would say that as a pretty iconic bit of modern architecture, which is about to be demolished, but it's not heritage listed. The one next door is. But I think the proposal, just for the whole sways of at-grade parking, is an underdevelopment of the site and a bit of a waste.
Andy, can I ask a quick question? Just value of the development. Do we know how much this is likely to be? The reason for asking that, if it's over 5 million, SCAP is potentially, could be the relevant authority. It's good that it's before the Unley Council Assessment Panel at this point in time. I just wanted to see what the value was.
I don't know if you saw that, but we nearly lost the flags.
Oh, I can see them moving.
I'm not sure of the value, I'm afraid. I don't have that on me at the moment.
Was that a curiosity question, Brenton?
It's definitely a curiosity question. The application's before us for a decision as to whether to proceed, so that's all we need to worry about, but it's more curiosity than anything.
Sandy's comments regarding the car parking, I fully agree with that, and I think that is something that really needs to be interrogated further, because the sea of car parking, particularly around the perimeter of the site, is not an entirely ideal outcome. And I think if this were to proceed to the next stage, which I'm guessing it will, I think that's something that would require to be resolved a little bit more cleverly than it currently is. Otherwise, I'm happy to support progressing this application to its next stage. I'm going to put the motion, unless, Brenton, you wish to sum up.
Summed up.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Yep, in favour.
All those against? That's carried. Thank you. Now we move on to the last 2 items, which are deferred items from our last meeting. Blackett Street was a bit earlier. Members, we had much debate over this item when we last considered it a couple of meetings ago.
If you want me, I'll start.
Yes, I believe you started previously.
I did. And the argument hasn't changed. This development has come back to us without any undercover car parking or any capacity to create undercover car parking on the site. And that was the one thing that we specifically asked them to address. We've had so many applications from Blackett Street for carports in front of the dwelling, most of which we have refused, that it's just not reasonable for us to approve an application where there is no car parking available that's undercover for a new dwelling wherever it might be, in my opinion.
So, Jenny, are you proposing to move an alternate motion?
If I get an opportunity, yes, I would move for refusal on the grounds that it doesn't.
I'm happy to take that if that's what you wish to do.
Okay, well, I might not get a seconder.
Well,
But the
do you wanna
grounds,
give it a
Andrew had
go?
Andrew had the grounds written up somewhere.
I do. I've just passed over to Lily.
Okay.
Just a second. I take it was just that it fails to provide sufficient on-site covered car parking. Jen?
That's correct. I mean, it looks like a really nice house, but that's not what we're here to decide.
Do you have a seconder?
I have no idea.
Someone willing to second that motion?
I'm happy to second that. My motivation is slightly different in that I would rather see that they just have a permit park on the street rather than a crossover. And if that building was brought closer to the street, 3 metres is the setback of the other cottages on that side of the street. If the building was brought forward and they were just allowed to park on the street in front, I'd be perfectly happy with that.
But they would be allowed to park in front of the house. There's no reason now why they can't do that. They don't need a parking permit. They park all day, every day under the current situation.
Yeah, and I'm not happy to support a proposal that basically, for the same reason my concern about the one on the corner of Doothy Street, that approving this with a car park in front of the dwelling is going to create a situation where the current or future owners are going to want to have a carport, and in any event, you're seeing a car parked in front of the building and the stone cottage precedent. The car's going to be in the open anyway, so why not just park it on the street and bring it closer to the street and give themselves a bigger house or bigger back alfresco area?
Well, I probably wouldn't approve that either, but I don't. I just think that they haven't done what we've asked them to do. They've rejigged the house, but they really haven't solved the problem. And in this instance, if in order to get a single garage under the main roof, then I might have to live with it being more than 30% of the frontage. That's the reality of it.
Brenton, Roger?
Yeah, I'm in the middle a bit. I see the argument.
You're at the bottom, Roger.
I'm at the bottom. So it depends on. I'm at the top of my screen. Blackett Street is such a, it's a short street. It's got this, and certainly, cottages and stuff, as Sandy has said. I mean, there's plenty of, I guess, cottages in Unley that have got no parking on their site. So that's historic. But a new development, I mean, if you should be able to design it so you can create an undercover car park. It's not impossible to do it here. That's my comment at this stage.
Brenton?
About the same. I probably would have been happier if they had actually proposed a car park, a covered car park on the immediately adjacent to the neighbour's garage on the northern side as part of the application. I wouldn't have been uncomfortable with that projecting out in front of the dwelling, given the character of the area and other buildings already, structures coming out to the street.
Not bad.
I'm not overly fussed with this application in its present form, and I'd probably be supporting the application in its present form.
Sandy, who moved this? Jenny did. Do you wish to?
No, I think it's all been said. We'll see what the numbers are, I guess, which way it goes.
Numbers game. All right. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I'm trying to see who's in favour.
Roger's changed his mind.
No, I was in the middle there, Jenny.
All those in favour? All those against?
Yeah, against.
And that's carried for refusal. It's one of those really, really middle of the road.
It's an awkward one.
Piggy in the middle ones.
I just think it sets a precedent if we have a new dwelling with no car park. Where does it go from there? That's just my opinion, of course.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can't help but think, I don't know if there's anyone in the gallery, but I can't help but think that perhaps the applicant hasn't necessarily got the very best advice that they could have possibly got.
They certainly didn't do what we asked them to do with the advice that we gave.
That's my point.
There are hundreds of houses in Unley where the people
We're going to move on to item 10 because we've made a decision on that. And I'd like to finish this meeting off. So, sorry, being a bit bossy there, but I guess it is my job. Removal of a tree, which was deferred from last time. Members?
I'm happy to support the recommendation. They've had a look at that. The arborist has come back. I mean, the money's not particularly the issue. I don't think it's about the practicality and the end result of doing it. And it sounds like from the arborist's comments, who's looked at this tree for a long time, and I think we need to take that into account. That really you're not going to achieve a great deal by trying that form of management. It's unfortunate, but there is some arguments about the safety and so on, which the arborist has set out.
Do you have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Go ahead.
Oh, you go.
No, I've
go,
done lots of things. Your turn.
Okay, I'm happy to second. Yep, done.
Any further discussion?
I'm pleased at least they've looked at the cabling. Not totally convinced that couldn't have been successful, maybe with different arborists looking at it, but at least they've looked at it.
Well, I was going to say that many arborists have looked at this tree and it seems to be weighing on the side of it not living another day.
Time to go.
Yeah, time to go.
Just if I can add my 2 cents worth, it's in the ground. This tree is in the grounds of a school, and any safety concerns, we've deferred it to have a look at whether it's manageable. Any safety concerns need to be addressed, and unfortunately, this tree won't live another day.
All right. Do you wish to sum up, Roger?
No, happy.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. We move on to any other items of business. Members?
I had a couple of things. Where have I written them down?
Don't know.
Yes, I have. I've got them in front of me. I had a complaint from a resident about the ease of use of the website, of the development of the agenda, and it taking like 30 minutes to download with the new website and not being able to go into each individual item, rather having to open the whole thing. So if that could be addressed, that would be fabulous. And if you have a look at the names in front of you, you'll see that the capitalisation is inconsistent. Some of us have got all lowercase, some of us have got
you can fix that yourself, Jenny.
Yeah, that's you. That's you, Jenny.
I did that.
Yep.
I didn't do that. Anyway, it needs to be consistent.
It does. Agreed.
Okay. It just, like, especially if it's being live zoomed, it doesn't look good.
I'll let Unley's department IT people help you fix that.
We have a IT manager here.
Yeah, you're the only one who's not quite right, Jenny.
No, Andrews isn't right, and somebody else's wasn't right.
That's yours, but
looks like
sort them out. Come on, Andrew.
Sort it out.
That's okay. They're minor issues, but I think being able to use the website usefully is more important and needs to be addressed as well.
Totally agree.
I've got two things very quickly.
Yep.
One is to say well done to the Unley Council staff and the IT department to actually do this. They've done a fantastic job and it's worked. And we've had no issues, and Sandy's laptop didn't run out of battery, which is even better. So
the only thing Sandy needs to do is to put a light on his face.
Yeah.
He's done.
And the second one is I noted in today's paper that the Urban Development Institute Awards, national awards, were held last week. Sorry, can you hear me?
No.
We've got you, Brenton.
We can hear you.
I'm still there. You can translate for me if that's the case. So the UDIA awards national awards were held last week. virtual awards, and that the Carmelite development, which this panel approved some years ago, was the national winner for a development. So I think that's a credit to the council staff in terms of the process that they went through and the development that's occurred. Just noting that.
I note that the actual Carmelite building is left as it was. Still not done.
Can't be demolished though.
No, but it hasn't been renovated yet.
Thank you for sharing that, Brenton.
Okay, well, thank you. Good night, everyone.
Any other business?
No, thank you.
Gary, Andy?
No,
Lily?
nothing from us.
Nothing
Well
from
done.
us. No, thank you for putting the meeting together. So we don't know what restrictions are going to look like next month, but you will keep us posted.
We certainly will. I'll probably send an email out in the next couple of weeks regarding next month's, Shanti. We'll certainly know early June what the likelihood is of the format for the meeting coming up.
Can I just say that I'm actually quite happy meeting remotely because it means I don't need to drive home and I can get cups of tea delivered to me.
I got a bowl of popcorn delivered.
You got a what?
I had a bowl of popcorn delivered by my kids.
Might have Jaffas delivered next.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't think with anything else we might just declare the meeting closed. Thank you all for your help, and thank you to Andy and Gary and the team at Unley Council, including your IT staff, for all of your support.